Up in the Indian Himalayas, there's this small, frozen body of water that holds a pretty chilling secret. Its official name is Roopkund Lake, but for decades it's been known by a much more dramatic name, Skeleton Lake.
So, what's the big secret? Well, imagine this. Every single year, as the ice begins to melt, hundreds of human skeletons just emerge from the shallow water. For nearly a century, this glacial grave has been one of the world's most compelling and, frankly, disturbing mysteries. And today, we're going to get to the bottom of what happened.
All right, so here's how we're going to tackle this. First, we'll get a feel for the place itself, this Lake of Skeletons. Then, we'll dive into all the wild myths and viral theories that popped up. After that, we'll see how science finally cracked the code, revealing who the victims actually were. And, that just leads to more questions, so we'll cover those unsolved mysteries, and finally, wrap up with what Roopkund means for us today.
Okay, first things first. To really get what happened here, you have to understand the place itself. Because Roopkund isn't just some picturesque mountain lake. It's basically a natural death trap. I mean, just look at these stats. We're talking about an altitude of over 16,000 feet. The air is ridiculously thin, the trek to even get there is grueling, and the weather, it can switch from calm to a killer blizzard in minutes. And this extreme environment, this is the key to the whole story. It's what killed so many people, but it's also the reason their remains were preserved so perfectly for centuries.
So for a long, long time, nobody had any real scientific answers. And you know what happens when there's a vacuum of information, right? Rumors, folklore, and some really wild theories rushed in to explain it all. And trust me, the stories were just as dramatic as the location.
And people came up with all sorts of ideas. I mean, for decades, these were the big ones. Maybe it was an ancient pilgrimage gone wrong, cursed by a local goddess. Or what about a lost troop of Japanese soldiers from World War II? That one was popular for a while. You see, every single theory had one thing in common. They all assumed it was one single, massive catastrophe that killed everyone at once.
But here's where things get really interesting. The very first piece of scientific evidence completely shattered that idea. When researchers finally started to radiocarbon date the bones, they didn't find a single time of death. Nope. They found that the bones came from completely different time periods, some separated by a massive gap.
And that discovery, that was the turning point. This is where the story pivots from just myths and legends to actual hard science. With modern technology, scientists could finally start asking the bones themselves for the real story.
This wasn't a quick process. It was a real slow burn. The official discovery was way back in 1942. Then in the 50s, we get that first bit of carbon dating. Things got more serious in 2004 with a big expedition. But the real game changer, that didn't happen until 2019. That's when a groundbreaking DNA study came out and basically rewrote the entire story.
And the tool that made it all possible was something called ancient DNA analysis, or aDNA. It's incredible stuff. You can think of it like a genetic time machine. Scientists can pull tiny, tiny fragments of DNA out of these ancient bones and literally read the genetic history of the people who died, figuring out where their ancestors came from.
So here it is, the big reveal. The DNA evidence showed that Roopkund wasn't the site of one tragedy, it was the site of at least two separate tragedies. And get this, they involved completely different groups of people from different parts of the world who all died in the exact same spot but centuries apart. And this table just lays out how mind-blowing the findings were. The study found three totally distinct groups. You've got Group A, people of South Asian ancestry, who died way back around 800 CE. But then you have Group B, people with DNA from the Eastern Mediterranean. Think modern-day Greece, and they died 1,000 years later, around 1800 CE. The truth was just so much weirder and more complex than anyone could have imagined.
Yeah, just take a second to process that number. 1,000 years. That's the gap between the two main death events. I mean, what are the odds that two completely different groups of people from different corners of the world would meet the exact same fate in the exact same remote, treacherous spot, a full millennium apart? It's just staggering.
Okay, so how did they die? Well, for that first, larger group, the skulls told the story. They had these distinct fractures, but they weren't from swords or arrows, or from falling down a cliff. They were all from blunt trauma to the top of the head. The kind of trauma you'd get from being pelted by hailstones the size of cricket balls. That old local legend about a furious goddess, it turns out it was kind of right. It was just the fury of Mother Nature.
But you know how science works.
Answering one big question often just opens up a bunch of new ones. And that's exactly what happened here. Solving the mystery of who died and how they died created a whole new set of puzzles that are honestly just as fascinating.
And this is probably the biggest one. What on earth were people with Greek ancestry doing at 16,000 feet in the Himalayas in the 1800s? It's a total historical mystery. There are zero records of any group from the Mediterranean traveling to this specific, super remote area back then. Who were they? Why were they there? Right now, nobody has a clue.
And it doesn't stop there. Remember, scientists have only analyzed a small fraction of the skeletons found so far. There could be hundreds more stories locked away in those bones. Plus, they found artifacts like iron spearheads and rings. Who did those belong to? What were the exact final journeys of these very different groups? The case of Roopkund is definitely not closed.
Okay, so let's fast forward to today. Because this ancient mystery isn't just a thing of the past. It's a real place, with a modern legacy that continues to captivate us.
Nowadays, Roopkund has actually become a pretty famous trekking destination, though it's carefully regulated. But here's the modern twist: climate change. The same ice that acted as a perfect freezer for centuries is now melting faster than ever. On one hand, that's a huge threat to the existing remains. But on the other, it means that even more of the lake's frozen history might come to light.
So when you boil it all down, what's the real story of Skeleton Lake? It's not a ghost story about a curse. It's not about a legendary battle or lost soldiers. It's something more profound. It's a story about human exploration and our absolute vulnerability to the power of nature. This spot was a treacherous pass of no return on an ancient route, and it didn't care who you were or where you came from. It claimed lives 1,000 years apart without prejudice.
And that leaves us with one last, kind of chilling question to think about. The secrets of Roopkund were locked in ice for over 1,000 years. As our planet keeps warming up and the world's ancient ice continues to melt, you have to wonder, right? What other frozen histories, what other lost stories are out there just waiting to be revealed?